What if the stories you've heard were true? What if the creaks, the cold chills, and the shadows were trying to tell you something? At Paranormal M, we listen. Subscribe and hear what hides in the dark. Human eyes don't glow, right? So I grew up in the woods, and I have many stories about strange going-ons. But this one happened a few weeks ago, and I just found this sub, and this seemed like a good place to put this. I just left my mother's house, and I was driving back to mine down a back road I've driven down many times before. I knew this road like the back of my hand, and I could drive down it with my eyes closed in reverse. And no, I haven't actually done that. As I was getting to the halfway point down the road, there was a thick fog, which is nothing new. There is fog on this road all the time. However, I was driving slowly, starting to take turns I don't really remember. There was a 90-degree right when it should have been left, followed by a wide left turn that felt like a full circle. Then I drove straight for about 5 minutes with no hills or drops. And that road never has a flat section that long. There was then a left turn up a hill, and as I was going up on the hair stood up on my body. I almost turned around there, and I decided to keep going because I don't know why. This is when I pulled my gun from my glove box. I had it on my lap. When I looked back to the road, some dude just crouched in the middle of the road, and I slammed my brakes, and he didn't even flinch. Figured it was just some dude going frog hunting or some shit. Many people on that road do just that. Honked my horn, and the guy stood up, and he was massive, like 7.5 feet tall. Thin as a mother, and his arms were just too long. Looked like he didn't have any clothes on either, and I laid on the horn again and clicked on the safety of my pistol just in case. He turned his head in what seemed like an almost full 180 degree. His eyes had that predator glow, like a wolf or a cat. I raised my gun and leaned out the window, telling him to get lost. He took a few steps toward me. And I know this was stupid, but I tried to pull the trigger and my gun just didn't fire. Hammer clicked and no boom. I whipped the car around faster than I've ever done before. I then just flew down the road at least 20 miles an hour over the speed limit. About 30 seconds after I turned around, I realized that I recognized all the turns and hills. I was driving down the road like I had never taken that first right. I went back during the day and still don't know where he took a wrong turn. There's no side streets down that road that are paved, and certainly no straightaway as long as the one I drove. I went to the range a day or two later and put that same round in the chamber, and it fired no problem. I have no idea what happened. I also don't drive that way at night anymore. Please tell me somebody knows what I saw. None of my friends believe me, and even my mother doesn't. And I know I'm not crazy, and I know this happened. A visit from my uncle. It happened a few days ago. For context, my grandpa's 93. He and my grandma had 7 children, 6 boys and 1 girl. Throughout the years, he's lost 2 sons and his wife. It's tragic to outlive your children, but he's the strongest man I know. He's a veteran who still has his wits about him, and he'll still work his tail off, even in a wheelchair. But anyway, the latest loss was that of my Uncle Larry, his son. Died a couple of years ago of liver failure at the age of 58. Now, Gramps was never a believer in anything paranormal. My grandma loved to tell ghost stories, but my grandpa would just insist it was all hogwash. Until the other day. Gramps was sitting in his recliner in the living room watching TV. Heard the front door open and a particular kind of hello, which only Uncle Larry said. Kinda sounded like hep, with a distinct tone of voice that could only be him. Gramps looked around, hearing footsteps going down the hallway, and he saw nobody there, which was strange. He could hear the heavy footsteps in the exact direction he was looking. Once he turned his head forward again, Larry stood in front of him wearing his infamous trench coat and ratted cowboy hat. Gramps described a feeling of utter happiness to see him, without any doubts or questions you'd think would pop into his mind about his very deceased son appearing right in front of him. Gramps smiled a big and looked into his eyes, saying a breathless hi. Then, before his very eyes, Larry grinned and disappeared. Childhood, childhood. I'm 35 now, and as if I've always been hypersensitive to the spiritual or vibrational energy side of life. Sorry, this is kind of long, but there was so much. Since high school, I was heavy into drugs and alcohol, and I hit it very well, to the point that I was a fully functioning, highly drugged-up person from morning until I slept at night. I played sports every year, and all throughout the year while still playing it off. It wasn't until I was 32 or 33 that life got crazy. It was right before the pandemic, and I remember crawling on my bedroom floor, gasping for air to the point I was freaking out. All I remembered was having a hard time breathing and gasping until I blacked out. I woke up on the floor hours later feeling empty and like I was in a long hallway. That's when I began hearing and seeing things daily and all day. This was literally a few months before the pandemic broke out, before any word of the virus or its name. And at that point in life, I had left a long toxic relationship and started coming into a groove where I began to go out again. It was 2019, and that year I got roofied 4 times, 4 separate events throughout the year, and coded twice in one night, a week before my 34th birthday. So that's 2 death, 0 me. I was released out of the hospital, but again there was that empty feeling, and it became bigger and overwhelming. So around 33, 34, I'm working this sick job in a cannabis dispensary in Hawaii, and it was during the beginning phase of the industry that was in Hawaii, so it was very exciting times. I eventually worked my way into a store manager position for their 3rd location, and that's when things began turning into a full-blown haunting. I lived with my parents at the time, and they helped me get my life together and watched my dog as I worked brutal soul-killing hours. My mom revealed to me after the entire haunting that in that beginning time, the security light outside of my room would stay on as if somebody was standing right outside of my window. She also spotted a male figure standing outside, believing somebody was there to the point that she went out with a bat. But it was always nothing, and all this happening, and I was oblivious. I started to become aware when I would go to the bathroom at work. A simple, small 5-by-5-foot bathroom with a sink, a 6-foot-tall locker column, and a toilet. I ate a lot, so I took a lot of shits. So when I'd be going number 2, the faucet to the sink would go off and on rapidly. It was one of those sensor ones, so I thought of it as being nothing. It began happening more and more to the point that every time I went in there, it was going off. And I began posting it to Instagram stories for fun and proof because nobody would believe me. One morning I'm getting ready and it's doing it again. So I record and I post, and one of my coworkers, who is more like a sister, comes in and tells the whole crew to gather around one morning before opening. Apparently, she had some stuff to tell us. At this point, it's a couple of months after opening, and just the water faucet was the biggest anomaly. She begins explaining how her wife saw a dark entity behind me, and to use her words, the entity played with me as if I was a toy. She said that she would see it in the window at night watching us leave, and as we did every night at about 7:30. She gave a stern warning to stop engaging, because it was not good. We're all interested, but it didn't fully set in until a few weeks later, and the wife literally drew the store's floor plan with specific details in each room connecting to the other ghost stories. These were other ghost stories that our security guards had experienced. but were not really made known until this moment. She said this dark entity dwells upwards and toward the back of the undeveloped space. A big open empty room with weird mirrors along some of the back walls. Totally construction site looking. It's fucking freaky. The wife would come and wait for a couple of hours in the parking lot until we finished. That's because the building was very strict with government regulation on people entering without proper documentation of a valid medical cannabis card. She drew the map one day, waiting in the car, having no idea of how the store was built. But she explained it like it was a vision she was getting while sitting out there. That kind of set the energy into an anxious-filled vibration. Plus, we were all working to the bone and drained from it all, and there was fear in the air, and that heightened everything quickly. We had a new girl from Tennessee, and she began experiencing stuff immediately. On her first week, she asked if there was anything wrong with the bathroom faucet, and we all looked at each other and said, "No." But she knew. One night, we had a late patient come, and we were helping her on the sales floor together while shutting down. Super casual chit-chat vibes because, well, she was the sweet auntie type. We had iPads which had a stand, and it was displayed on showing our menu. We had 3 on the sales floor always, and always in its stand during open hours. And while we're talking to this lady, helping her choose something to help her cannabis needs, one of the iPads fly off the stand and travels about 3 feet. Tennessee and I look at each other with a fearful what the fuck look. The room gets silent as we look at each other, and the woman that we're helping looks upward and around and asks if we got the building blessed. Sadly, they skipped that process for this store, only because of the delays it took to open, and they just wanted it done. So the answer was no, and we told her no. She made her purchase and left right after that. There was 3 of us there, and as soon as she left, we locked up and came back to the sales floor to express our shock, like what just happened, and why did that lady leave like that? Then boom! The building shakes as there's this huge boom on the roof that vibrates the whole room. And being the manager with 2 freaked out girls with me, I'm like, grab your ish and let's motherfucking go now. Grab your ish. We ran like it was motherfucking chasing us. Being the manager, I had to close the building down, so they waited right outside the door as I went and secured the building, set the alarm. We left shook and calmed each other, but I know for sure that day stuck with them. Security would come and bring supplies to us, since we were a few cities away from the main hub. So the guard and I are walking into my office when we swipe with my card and enter. The sensor doesn't register us, so the lights are off, and so she tries to manually press the lights on and nothing. At this point, the hauntings are becoming common knowledge for anybody who frequented there. So we're standing there a little scared, and I jokingly say, "We gotta go out and ask the ghost for the light." She looks at me with like a I'm dumb face, and we leave and close the door. I knock and I ask out loud, "Yo, ghost, can you turn the light on?" I swipe my card and we enter, and let there be motherfucking light. Working normally. She pieced the fuck out so fast I was just in awe, like, oh shit, this is for real, for real. To save some time, I'll summarize the hauntings, because the end is fucking nuts, I promise, and lights are going off and on, and now no one wants to use the bathroom. And in the back undeveloped space during broad daylight, you hear conversations and people walking back there. The dark and empty room in a highly secured building, caught on security camera. We have light switch physically turning off and on, as well as more iPads flying off their stands. And I was having to send home coworkers who got locked into a room with lights turned off and hearing growls because they were too scared. Some were getting sick. The speaker system would increase in volume until it was maxed out. But it made a beeping noise as it increased, but no one was near it. A noise made when you physically press the volume plus button, pounding and knocking and scratching from the walls where the empty undeveloped space was on the other side. The light bulb fell from the bathroom light when I was in there, unscrews itself and fell into the sink while I was standing in the mirror. And we had a locker in the bathroom that would shake and move to the point we found its screws and bolts on the floor every morning. Thinking the locker was going to fall and hurt somebody, we moved it to the undeveloped space. And then my friend's wife asked her that day if we moved something. We said, yeah. She said, not a good idea. She had a dream it fell and hit me, knocking me out in the bathroom. And that ramped up the haunting energy. Apparitions and electrical disturbances on security cameras. And many times I'd have to go back to the store after we closed, and every time I left I could feel someone watching me. And one morning, we found face and handprints on the window as if somebody was pressed up against the glass peering out. My bottle flew across the room when we walked away for a second with footprints in the spilled liquids. Footprints that didn't match any of ours. Lights, fans, phones burning out around me at home. My mom and I started hearing loud booms in the backyard at 3 a.m. So many others, but I'm just high and my mind is running wild. This was all in a 5-month period to give even more of an idea of how fast it all had happened. Okay, last one before then, because it made it to our COO. One morning I'm running late for work, and in our company communications we used Slack under my account. Something messages asking where's Aaron in an open channel. And at the same time, I'm having a conversation with my assistant saying that I'm on the way now, leaving my home. That day was delayed when one of my window jalousies had cracked and broke. I didn't see the question asking it for me until I got into work. Jalousies? Anyway, I get into work and our IT does their magic and sees that the message was sent to my phone the same time when the window broke. And while I was messaging my assistant. Now on to the end. All during this time, our corporate office was too busy to even entertain a blessing, but after all of that, it was physically affecting us. I was able to look for someone to bless it, and at the time we had a kahu, or spiritual intuitive teacher healer person. It was used in our family because she helped detach an entity from my niece, keeping her from sleep and eating to the point she was going to doctors and I didn't know why. And what the fuck? Yeah. Alrighty then. So one day, before opening, I call her and she knew. She said, he's right behind you, and I'm on the other side of the lobby wall in the undeveloped area when my friend comes through the door saying she heard a growl, and she feels sick to her stomach. She was right on the other side of the wall from where I was. I have to send her home because she's pale-faced and shook. And this kahu begins telling me that this entity is not good. He was obsessed with watching me and playing with me, hence all the disturbances. She begins to explore more that he attached his energy to me during our construction build walkthroughs. At the same time when my mom started seeing that guy outside in the backyard and the security light right outside my room constantly getting triggered and staying on at night. The big one was when she explained that he was a child molester and did a lot of horrible things when he was alive, and that he died in the area behind her building by the water. Either he drowned or someone drowned him. That was why the water faucet kept going off and on. So I'm floored, but quickly after those events they aligned and we finally got blessed. It was the perfect energy cleanse which calmed things down completely. Why this is huge is starting around the age of 6 or 7 until middle school. I was heavily molested while playing sports to the point I was physically having it hurt me. Then right before high school I was drugged, got hit a few good times, and raped and blacked out, and then he left me at someone's house. That was when I lost myself in drugs and heavily to help with carrying on and having no family to help or even know. And some 20 years later, this haunting was the huge universal event that shook me to begin this huge moment to heal from my trauma, because the life I was living literally killed me a few times. 35 and deaf, leading a better life toward a healing and sobriety. No longer working there, and life took a complete turn, but for the better. Don't fuck with the universe. This be wild. Real paranormal encounter. My first memory of anything really paranormal was me walking in the pitch black at 7 years old. And I was scared of the dark. I would never consciously do this. Going down the stairs of my mom's house, looking to the left and seeing a white spirit in front of the refrigerator with the fridge being open. And that's all I remember. Nothing afterward, and I to this day cannot remember if it was a dream or real. Second experience. I'm 13 at a continuation school with gang members and druggies. They make a fake Ouija board out of paper and I play along. That night I woke up from a nightmare about a demonic goat and a pentagram. It's 3 a.m. and my TV's on, the stereotypical static like in horror movies. The remote was on my bed right in front of my face, aimed at me perfectly. I always turn the TV off and put my remote on the floor next to my bed routinely because, well, I'll stay up all night if I don't decide to go to sleep. I brushed it off and went to bed a little bit scared, but that morning the paper we played with was ripped up and scattered in the lawn. This could have just been the kids playing a trick, though. Third story. Because of the second story, I had my room set up like I had OCD, so I would know if anything moved. I had my door propped up with my laundry basket. I didn't have hinges on the door at the time, and everything was in its correct place and the lights off with the door closed. I do close the door with no hinges. I remember waking up to something trying to get my attention, not verbally, but like telepathically, like when somebody's watching you and you can feel it. I opened my eyes, and I'm pretty sure this was me still in the dream, but I saw an all-black face staring at me like somebody peeking into my room. Only saw the face, no body, like it was floating, like it was bent over, creeping in. I then become fully awake, and just like in my dream, my door was open, but I didn't see the face like I did in my very first memory or dream. I look around, and the hallway light is on, like my vision, but no face. My light and ceiling fan are on, and my fucking office chair that's always perfectly parked in front of my desk was rolled all the way to my bed. It was to where it was touching my bed. I'm frozen in fear, and I'm waiting for something to pop out at me or to hear something or for me to hopefully still be dreaming. But it was real, and I was losing my mind in fear. And this all happened at 6 a.m. this time. 2 minutes go by, and I hear my mom go to the bathroom. I muster enough courage to get up and go to her. I ask her if she's at my door trying to get my attention. She said she just woke up. My heart dropped like a fucking anchor. I have no history of sleepwalking, just a FYI. I tell her what happened, and she shook too. She had her own experiences, and I told her to tell me because I was too afraid to want to hear about it. Or told her not to tell me. I'll get to that soon. I end up going back to my room, and when I walk past my 3-year-old little brother's room, at least 3 of his toys start going off. I can't make this up. Then nothing happened. I just went to school real confused and scared, not trying to explain what the fuck I just encountered. Nothing really happened since the third story when I was 16, but it doesn't end there. Like I said, I told my mom and sister to never tell me what happens. But fast forward to a few months ago when I'm 25. I finally asked Mom what she's been seeing. So let's get into my mom and sister's encounters. The first thing my mom tells me is there's 4 ghosts in the house. And of course, the first one she says is a white ghost that's not evil in the kitchen. I've never told my mom about the dream of me seeing a white ghost in the kitchen. Then she says there's a baby in my little brother's, the toys going off by themselves. Another toddler in the hallway, which my mom and sister claim to have seen. They said he has a striped shirt, and then she says there's a tall, big, very evil entity in my room. She then says she's seen the big eyes, and one spying on her out of the corner of her eye, and then my sister saw it too downstairs on the couch, and the big evil one was on the staircase peeking around the corner. My sister said she felt a hand touching her back when she was laying on the couch downstairs when she was younger. She also said she one time went to the bathroom at 3, seen a big shadow guy in my chair just staring down or like focused on her in the dark. This is where it gets real crazy. My little brother told my mom about a nightmare, and about a nightmare B had of someone sitting in my chair, like I said. I have no reason to lie, and this shit's crazy. Luckily, nothing's really happened besides hearing something thrown at a wall when I was home. A wild story with a ghostly ending. My neighbor was a woman who drank a lot, did a lot of drugs, and had a lot of money. For purposes of anonymity, let's call her Jane. I wasn't too close with her, but sometimes she'd want company and I'd get high with her, or she would want company and go to the store. They would buy me whatever. One day, she comes to my door after recently being discharged from the psych hospital. Jane was already high and drunk and basically tells me that we're going out and we're going to party. I agreed, and long story short, after going to a bar and drinking, she wanted some cocaine. We just kept talking about it. I, at the time, was an addict and mostly abstaining from street drug use, but was taking methadone and was familiar with the drug spots, and since she was going to spend hundreds and give me a bunch of money for myself, I told her that while I can't get coke, I can get crack. She was okay with that, so we went to the west side of Chicago. On the way, her BMW security system activated because earlier she left keys in the car and climbed through the sunroof to unlock the car and retrieve the keys. Out of nowhere, the wheel locked and we had this whole ordeal. The panic of that instant transformed Jane into a fun-loving drunk to a violent belligerent one. She went from being sweet to being like the Exorcist. And this transformation occurred as we were in the hood a mile from the open-air drug market. Somehow I managed to make the deal go down without her creating a scene or drawing attention from police. I picked up like $100 in crack and $100 in heroin. We got in the car and she started speeding and talking about suicide. Jeez. I was so freaked because I couldn't persuade her out of the insanity, so I pulled out the drugs so I could at least calm my nerves with opiates before the inevitable crash and arrest. Jane demanded to use when she saw me pull out the bag. I tried to explain to her that we had no crack pipe, and we couldn't use it yet. None of that could go through to her, and she ripped the bag out of my hand, and unknowingly she grabbed a bag of heroin, ripped the stop with her teeth, and snorted it. Shortly after, we finally crashed when she failed to stop at a light and rear-ended a young black man in the heart of the ghetto. The crash snapped her out of her insanity, and she rushed over and gave the man $50 and some weed. His car wasn't damaged, and he understood by our dialogue that we had drugs on us and needed to dip, so he accepted what she gave him, and he even helped calm her down and bring her to her car. After that, I was allowed to drive, and I could see the drugs were taking effect, and she was falling into a blissful but conscious state. When we arrived back home, I walked her and just left all the drugs, knowing that she had too much. And at this point, she was still conscious, and as far as I knew, she had none of the hard drugs we just picked up, but did have alcohol and Xanax that she was prescribed. After that night, I hadn't seen her for about a week, and I was nervous something had happened to her. I Googled her name and found out that she died last night. It hit me so hard, and after that I started regularly using again. One day I was smoking outside, weeks after this happened, and 2 police detectives arrived at my place. They knew we were together because they got access to the ATM camera where I withdrew money from her card. I told them pretty much everything, but left out the part where she grabbed the heroin from me and snorted whatever while she was, speeding down the road, raging on about suicide. The detectives left and told me that they'd get back in touch after they got toxicology reports and do further investigations. A few days after that, I was smoking a black and mild cigar and filming myself blowing O's. At the time I recorded myself, I was completely alone in my patio and it was totally silent. I didn't immediately rewatch the video, but when I did, I noticed the sound of a woman's voice whispering closely to the mic saying, "Hurry up and say it." It took no time at all for me to realize whose voice that was and what she wanted. She wasn't a heroin user and only used accidentally while drunk and raging. When detectives returned a few weeks later, I made a point of telling them. They recorded a video of me telling all that happened to her family, and the overdose and the heroin was used as an open question and confusing them, so it all fit in with my intuition and the words captured on video. I live in an apartment complex and she lived above me, and since then things fall over all the time and lights turn on by themselves. The weirdest incident was I walked in the bathroom and the shower curtain was rapidly shaking. I ran out thinking a rat was in the bathtub, but nothing was there. Sounds of footsteps are ever present late at night. I warn friends about it when they stay the night, and every time every friend that stays will say that they did hear strange noises and footsteps. I put the ghost voice video on YouTube, which I have linked, but listen closely, and you'll hear a woman whisper, "Hurry up and say it." The Hat Man haunted me. The Hat Man haunted me. Hunted me. Backstory, 5 to 8 years old, and I grew up in a chaotic household with a drunk father. The first set of dreams didn't have the Hat Man in them, but were certainly related. I don't remember too much of these dreams, but it consisted of a little girl with pitch black eyes who tried to gain my trust, and did, and led me to this house. I believe she was leading me to him. The house was creepy and caused me to yell "no" in my sleep. The Hat Man dreams. These dreams came directly after the first set. I remember these like this was yesterday. The setting was an old ranch on a dirt road. I never went to the ranch, I only stayed on that dirt road, and the ranch, however, was always dark and built on old rustic wood. The ranch to the right of me, and everything else around me, was nothing but dirt. The first time I saw him, he stood away with a top hat, a trench coat, and a shadow for a face. I stood in the dirt road motionless and scared for my life. He then immediately got really close and tried to get me into his portal onto the ground. The portal was a circle, and it was maybe as big as the width of a car, and I refused. That's when he started to hurt me. He scratched me, and I would wake up with scratches in real life. He choked me, and I could feel the sensation of being choked in real life, and he would come back night after night after night to try and get me into his portal. Inside his portal was pure darkness. Nothing to see, just black. The setting never changed throughout the dreams. Always just a ranch on a dirt road. After nights of terror and waking up in pain with scratches and being choked, I decided that tonight I wouldn't be scared of him, and hopefully he would go away. That night was the worst of all nights. He threw everything at me, scratches and chokes, and inflicted pain in my body, and then he dragged me into his portal, and I was only hanging on with 2 hands with my feet dangling in his portal. In that moment I knew I couldn't be scared of him, so I just hung there not screaming or fighting back, and I realized I wasn't scared anymore, and he disappeared. When I woke up immediately after the dream, I decided I wasn't going to be scared of him, and I looked into my doorway. And as a kid, I always shut the door before I slept, but this time it was cracked. I looked and I saw him, but he looked different this time. He had a brownish face, and you couldn't really make out a nose or a mouth, and his eyes were silver or white. He just stared at me for about a minute. He then just left, and I haven't seen him since. Pretty sure my earliest memory was of seeing a ghost. But do ghosts tend to look like living people? I was really little, like still sleeping in a crib in my parents' room, but I was old enough to be able to get out of my crib by myself. I was laying there on my back. I saw the door open and my dad's there. But he's blue, like dead. Not just his skin, but his clothes are sort of blue too. Maybe even glowing a little. He makes a funny face at me and starts making silly noises and walking toward me like he was doing this thing to tickle me. I was paralyzed, so I was so scared because this thing looked like my dad and sounded like him. But I knew it wasn't him. He was contorting his face so much and just sounded crazy. Then it just disappeared. I got up and climbed out of my crib and ran looking for my parents. And that's all I remember. But I was so terrified I couldn't even scream or call out, and I was too little to be able to verbalize what happened. I suppose it could have been a nightmare, but it was so terrifying I couldn't even yell or cry about it. I was a nervous kid from then on, and I was always afraid that something paranormal was coming to get me. This isn't the only time I saw a family member that wasn't there. There was another instance when I was in elementary school. My older sister and I shared a bedroom. I was on the top bunk of her bunk beds just trying to sleep. She was out with friends. I had terrible allergies as a kid, and that night I was struggling to sleep, just laying there in the dark, sniffling and feeling miserable. Then I see my sister walk in, and I sat up to greet her, but she just fell into her bottom bunk as if it was maybe her being really tired. The whole bed shook when she hit her mattress. I looked over the edge and I saw her foot hanging off the edge of her bed. Thought it was weird that she didn't see me sitting up and looking at her. After an hour or two went by, I started having a sneeze attack, needing to blow my nose a lot. I was worried I was going to wake her up, so I got up, climbed down my ladder, and started walking toward the door. I felt like I should check on her to see if she slept through all of my sneezing. But when I looked, her bed was empty. Turned on the lights and tried to stay awake the rest of the night, but eventually I slept. The next day I was told my sister had spent the night at her friend's house. Do ghosts try to look like people you know, and why would a ghost do this? What do you think it was trying to do? I know this could have been sleep paralysis, but I guess I have had many instances of that throughout my life. But these 2 times felt different since the entity looked like my family, not a monster or witch or anything. Especially the one with my sister, because I was up and moving around, not paralyzed into my bed. Hadn't fallen asleep that night yet. When I told my dad about the incident with my sister, all I got was a, uh-huh. Pretty sure my house is haunted. What do y'all think? So I moved to a new house about a year ago. One of my siblings is renting out the basement. They kept mentioning hearing sharp tapping on windows and other unexplained noises before I moved in. We were doing extensive renovations and literally repainted the whole house from baseboards to ceilings. I never thought much of it until I was in the basement completely alone in the house. Well, I had heard this sharp tapping on the window myself. Ran outside to catch who did it. No window blinds, I was just standing next to the basement door to the outside. Well, no one was there, and it was in the middle of the day. So neighbors are all gone and kids at school. Not many in this neighborhood currently anyway. Fast forward a few months and I was doing dishes in the kitchen, and a cup moves in a curved line toward me on the counter, like less than 5 inches in distance, but still. I tried to recreate it and couldn't do it, and one day my siblings and fiancé were home, all in the same room with me. The light in the dining room began dimming and flickering. Never did that before or since. Then on the 4th of July weekend, my cousins were visiting, and one of their kids, who was alone since others are outside, yells from one of the bedrooms that the light kept turning off and on. And I hadn't mentioned this to my cousins yet. Then on the same weekend, I'm in the kitchen, and a covered plate of raw burger patties falls off the stovetop without anyone touching it. And yesterday morning I woke up and noted that my feet were cold and I needed to pull the blanket back on them. When I felt the blanket put back over my foot, like in the laundry detergent commercials where they sort of shake sheets out, then felt a light pressure in what I felt to be like a shape of a hand. Didn't feel like whatever it was malicious in any way, but still, There's been too many incidents with too many witnesses to ignore this any longer. I believe I saw a ghost when I was 4 years old. Necessary background information. I'm high-functioning autistic, which means I have a harder than usual time communicating with people, but can still lead a somewhat normal life. So when I was a kid, it wasn't uncommon to have strangers over in the house. My parents had a lot of friends, and my dad worked from the garage, which was a separate building in front of the house. My mother would often have friends over, so I was used to having adults I didn't know come over and visit. Then this one time I went to the living room and noticed that my mom had a friend with her. He was a tall guy with curly hair and dark clothes. I recall him with a leather jacket. He was just standing in the corner, behind some furniture and looking at me and making faces. And I got instantly spooked and asked my mom who was her friend. She looked around, confused, and asked me who I was talking about. To which I replied by pointing toward the corner without looking or saying, just there. She told me that there was no one there and for me to stop lying. Now, apparently autistic people have issues with injustice, and this is what I remember the most from this episode. I got supremely pissed at my mom for accusing me of lying when the guy was right there. I insisted that there was someone there and looked again, and guy still standing in the same spot making scary faces, like angry faces and sticking the tongue out and stuff. Then looking at me and my mom. She looked in his direction again and told me there was no one there again, telling me to go there and touch the guy I was allegedly seeing. Now, if there was one thing that I absolutely didn't do, was to go anywhere near that guy. Then I saw my mom staring in the direction and him looking back at her and convinced myself that she was just messing with me. Stomped out of the living room. I remember being so angry at her for trying to fool me and having this dude scare me. Later that night, my dad stepped after work. I asked him who was their friend that had come over, and he just went like, "What? Who are you talking about? Nobody came over today." I described the guy, and he just said he didn't know anybody that looked like that. Then called my mom over and inquired her over it. And she once again scolded me and told me to stop lying. And again, I got so angry that I just went back to my bedroom and started crying. Eventually, she came over and kind of apologized, but insisted that there was no one else in the house with us, so I kind of just tried to convince myself that I'd somehow imagined it and moved on. My wife and I were watching, like, some guy telling ghost stories on YouTube recently, and that's what brought over this memory for me. A couple of days later was my mom's birthday, so I went to visit her and asked her about it. She doesn't recall this episode, nor does my dad, but she remembers that at this time she would hear loud cracks around the house, like if someone was hitting the walls with a hammer. She would also see figures, like from the corners of her eye. I was also often very sick. She remembers taking me to some religious house about 2 years later, where a lady told her that I had a dark presence over me, gave her some stuff to do, like lighting candles and so on. And after she did it, I got healthier and she stopped seeing and hearing stuff in the house. Again, I don't believe this stuff, but I have a hard time dealing with this memory. The hairs on my neck get all up from just remembering that guy in the corner of that room. Creepy encounter, and more. So I've been thinking about this quote-unquote encounter for a while. And there's this one hill that creeps me the fuck out, especially at night. The hill's in a town called Ravenna, located in New York. Oh, I am very familiar. I went to this abandoned house, situated on that hill. Now, when I entered the house, it was maybe 45 degrees Fahrenheit outside, which isn't warm, but it was super humid. But the moment I entered it, it felt like I was freezing, and I felt like somebody left the air conditioner running for hours on end. Now, I'm something that's called a sensitive. It's like a medium, except I can't see the spirits, but I can feel their presence. I feel blind. from my understanding. Now, when I say this house felt hostile, I mean it felt hostile. I felt watched from one room in particular. If I was standing in the kitchen, if you go straight, there's 2 rooms at the end of the hall, and I felt watched from that area, but couldn't pinpoint where in particular. Now, this house looked like a tornado tore through it. The floor was rotten and partially missing. And there was paint chips everywhere, and among other things, and generally just not the best looking. I remember that house being built and seeing somebody move into it, but when I went in, there were belongings everywhere. Think of Chernobyl. It's as if they end up and left suddenly and randomly. I even found an envelope with the name on it. Can't remember the name, but I eventually found the kids' room and found a kid's toy, which immediately gave me a shiver and goosebumps the moment I touched it and realized what it was. Once the house felt extremely angry or whatever, and I just left. And as I was leaving, I was walking back down the hill, and all I could see on my left side is a blur that comes to a sudden and abrupt stop, which immediately caught my attention. And the blur was white, but I couldn't make out any details. I just knew it was pissed, and it was glaring at me. And the town's about 250 years old, and as where the creature was, it was near the wooded section, which was located pretty close to the house. But I noticed the figure and crossed the road to the other side and refused to go back until I came out into the main street. In a separate session, I heard footsteps like boots come from the attic. I heard a metallic clang, which I was unable to debunk as a pipe issue, or me kicking something. And there was a plastic chair in there, and it felt colder than cold. Outside, it was probably 30 degrees, but inside felt like it was a solid 20. I also found a pair of antique cutlery in the entrance to the basement. A spoon and a fork, mainly. That whole town is actually super creepy, and I believe it was a... No, that's not the one on the water. I don't want to say it was mining, but it was I think they processed ice there, if I'm not mistaken. Like blocks of ice when you had to float it down the river. Or maybe that's the next town up. All I do know is that I've been into an antique store over there and everything was gnarly. Very strange experience that occurred some months ago. So this happened sometime in February, I want to say the middle of it. It was still fairly cold out, and I recently got out of a psych ward a few days prior to this story taking place. But there's this house on this hill, and it's an absolutely gorgeous house. Around 3,000 square feet, I'd say, basement and an attic. So around 4 floors. One day I was bored, and I decided to go on a walk over to this hill, and now at the time I didn't even know where this house was situated. I just knew the hill and wanted to go on a walk. So I'm walking, and not much happens between my house and the hill, besides seeing some shifty guy, which doesn't really contribute to the story. So I get to the hill, and I just see how fucking steep it is, and I groan, but I go up. Now this hill isn't that bad to walk up, but at the time I assumed it'd be horrible. So I'm walking up this hill, and it's forested on the right side, and the left side had a bunch of houses. So I'm walking up the hill on the right side, and it's night by this point, like pitch black. And as I'm walking, I'm just looking around, not seeing the whole lot, and eventually I reach the house and almost walked past it. Couldn't see it at first, and proceed to say, I remember when this was being built and when people lived in it. And now I'm a huge fan, I guess you could say, of urban exploration and exploring super abandoned places. So I saunter on in, just driven by curiosity. I'm curious by nature, just as I am science-based and logical and analytical for the most part. It looks like a bomb went off, like floors are rotten and piles of debris and a bunch of other shit. I think the owners left a bunch of their mail, and I'd eventually find a Peppa Pig plushie in this Thomas the Tank Engine wheel. But it looked like they panicked and left their shit and left. The attic had a bunch of trash and suitcases as well. But fast forward maybe a week and I returned to this house. and quite a few things happen. I'm just gonna jump into it. As I'm walking around, I eventually reach the living room, and there's this green plastic lawn chair, like the ones you'd see in movies, the white ones. It was noticeably colder than everything else. Keep in mind, it's maybe 50 degrees Fahrenheit out, and this house felt like someone was blasting the air conditioning at max for hours, whereas outside it felt like stepping into a swamp. I didn't think much of that. As I stand up, I heard this metallic clang, like a pipe or something. So I tried to recreate it. I kicked this piece of metal near me, and it made a totally different sound. So it wasn't me accidentally kicking something. But ultimately, couldn't debunk it, so I moved on. And I eventually heard footsteps from the attic, like somebody wearing heavy mud boots. Like 3 or 4 thumps. Now, mind you, there's nothing in the attic that can make any sort of sound. Same as the basement. And upon hearing this, I was beyond interested and even went up to go to the top and check it out. Obviously, I found nothing. So, I couldn't debunk that either, so eventually I left like an hour later. After hearing only one other thing happen, it sounded like tapping against a metal pipe, either that or dripping water. Which is weird, because the house obviously didn't have any utilities. But I leave, and as I'm walking down the hill, I see this large white mass move very and alarmingly quick off to my left. Now it's super pitch black, but I snap my head to it before anything can happen, and all I get was the feeling of being watched, which had happened in the house, and I was in the kitchen. I felt watched from over by, I assume, the son's bedroom, but not a child's gaze, an adult. But me and this white mass more or less make eye contact for a few seconds. Then I just decide to cross the street and leave. I did some digging on that property, and every owner only lived there for 2 to 4 years before leaving. The 2 most recent seem to have vanished off the site's database. No contact information, no new address, and nothing. Recently, when I went in there alone, there was a painting of something, and it was hard to make out what it was of, and there was a Curious George book on the counter. Then me and a friend went up to the house to hang out in their car, just so we could be kind of tucked away, and they said to me that they saw this shadow figure coming straight at them when they went to go take a piss. And the garage light was on, when it previously wasn't, so we assumed it was the motion light, but refused to turn it off. Very scary experience while I was in bed. This happened to me a few months ago. For backstory, in the house I live in now, I've been living in for 10 years. We've never had really any paranormal activity, so this was quite terrifying. And I'm a fairly heavy sleeper, so I don't always wake up to things in the middle of the night. This time was different, though. I woke at about 3 a.m. one night to feel my bed shaking slightly. I thought I was imagining things, but then the shaking got more violent. I could feel at the end of the bed the sheets being pulled off the side as if something was trying to climb up onto the bed. This and the shaking got more intense, and I couldn't move or do anything as I was paralyzed with fear. As all this was still happening, I felt the mattress next to my chest being pushed down, as if someone or something was sitting on the bed next to me. Then I heard a low demonic growl in my ear, and at this point I screamed and it all stopped. I was awake until the sun came up. I had been half expecting my parents to come running in as their room is right next to mine, and the walls are super thin, but they didn't, and I told them what happened in the morning. They said they didn't hear me scream or anything growling at all, and they don't really believe that all this happened. I still think about this often, and maybe I was dreaming and that's why my parents didn't hear anything, and maybe it was sleep paralysis or something. Nothing has happened since, though, and I really hope it never happens again. Wolf of Baldham. In 2016, I went to study abroad for a year in Munich. It's in Germany. I went to plenty of places in this time, local towns to explore and further regions of the country for hiking. I got to know a girl in my program, and we started spending more time together as we were both from the Detroit area, went to the same university. I liked her at the time, and 19-year-old male, and she was a 20-year-old female. She liked me. I was a bit more spontaneous with exploring, with the idea of being as random as possible. And this particular day was on December 26th, and we were at Marienplatz, a central location subway station in Munich, deciding on where we wanted to go and what we wanted to do that day. I played a game with a friend back in the States called the highway game, where we would just drive and take random highways and take exits randomly to get lost as possible. He'd have a good time talking during our time trying to get back home without any use of our GPS. Anyways, why this is important is because that's what me and my friend were doing at Marienplatz. Just getting lost, which is how we ended up taking the S4 S-Bahn train toward Ebersberg. We still haven't decided which exit we plan to take as we're just sitting on the train and waiting for the right moment to hop off. We decide to get off at the Baldum stop and begin to walk out of the station toward the village. We're in the beginning stages of talking. We've had some close moments while talking, and this just felt like another timeless talking session with her. We walked around the town and eventually found some woods to walk through that were quite dense, covered with moss on the ground and tall pines everywhere. We made the mistake of going out in the early afternoon. After an hour train ride, arrived at 3 p.m. In the middle of December, the sun was dropping quite quickly, making for a forest with a shadowy backdrop where I couldn't see much beyond 100 feet or so. We found a patch of thick moss, void of any trees, which made for a nice spot to lie down and just stare at the clouds moving by. There really wasn't any snow cover, and it was about 40 degrees, so it wasn't that cold. And as we sit there taking it all in, I just felt like it was a good moment to lean up against and go for a kiss. As I get up on my elbow looking at her, I notice something moving in the background within the shadows, just darting between the trees. It wasn't for more than a few seconds later that I realized whatever was darting between the trees was now darting towards us. Didn't think much of it since I thought it must have just been a dog, but as it got nearer, I realized this thing was canine and huge. Before it reached us, I stood up and stopped within feet of us, snarling and growling extremely loudly. Dragged my friend up and told her to just start walking away. I followed her, but noticed the canine creature walked in a circular path around us to the 3 o'clock position from where it stopped. I began to walk with her, and as I turned around to check where it was, I saw that it was gone. Never heard it leave or saw anything run away. The only thing we did hear was a howl about 30 seconds after we left from laying on the moss, at which point we darted to get the fuck out of the woods. And as we did, we came across a gentleman walking a small dog, greeted him and felt a sense of security. Nonetheless, we left as quickly as possible and went back to the station to catch the next train back home. Now, I know one may be thinking that it could have been a wolf, but later that evening I looked to see if there were any wolves in the area, but found that the majority, if not all, wolves were killed following the expansion of human society. The closest known populations of wolves being near Poland and Ukraine and Russia. It could have been a large dog, but let me tell you, I have dogs and I've grown up around dogs, and I've been attacked by a dog before. I know what I saw was not your average canine. It looked wolf-like, but was huge. If anybody has any idea what happened, or is from the Munich area, knows anything like this happening, please tell me, as my now girlfriend and I still talk about how freaked out we are about this. All I can say is that just as quickly as I noticed the canine, and as it tried to attack us, it was gone, making for a supernatural experience in my book. I think I was a World War I soldier in the past life. The first time it happened was last summer. I was in a Japanese restaurant with some friends when I suddenly dissociated. A few moments later, I couldn't see anything, and even if I felt like my eyes were open, I started having a very strong but foggy memory of me being in a ferry boat. surrounded with fancy-dressed people, and I stared at the coast out of the windows, then looked at a plate filled with what looked like mashed potatoes and gravy. The memory stopped abruptly, and I wasn't disassociating anymore, but I felt terribly tired. The second time was in June. I was at a friend's house playing video games and chilling, and I started disassociating again. Everything went pitch black, and then I started remembering again. It was one of those very old steam trains, and it strongly smelled like leather. I wasn't alone. There were other guys, all in what I recognized as an Italian World War I uniform. They all had sad and nostalgic expressions on their faces. I looked out of the window, and then it all went away. Just like the other time, I felt very tired. The third and last time for now. If anything new happens, I'm going to keep you guys updated. About a month ago, I was home alone on my couch looking at a TV program when one of those strange memories kicked in again. Everything went black for a while. Then it started. I was in a trench that smelled awfully like dirt and mold, sweat, and decay, along with a lot of other men. And again, everyone was in uniform. We were all looking at an officer giving out a speech in Italian. But even if it was in my own language, I couldn't understand a word. It all sounded very familiar, but it just felt like that wasn't my language. He spoke for what felt like a minute, making this the longest memory I had so long. Then it all stopped mid-sentence. Everything went back to normality, but I was so tired that I fell asleep within a few minutes. Everything has been true so far. In December of 2018, I was visiting some friends in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and staying with them. I was traveling with my Portuguese girlfriend. One of the roommates, Hannah, came into the front room where we would sleep and started a conversation with us. She started talking about fortune tellers, psychics, and mediums. People who could see people's futures and past. And at the end of the conversation, I told Hannah that it's interesting how she told all of us this. One day before I was going to one for the first time. Another friend had planned for me to visit one the next day in another part of Nova Scotia. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even my girlfriend. Hannah told me a few things in that conversation. Namely, how she wouldn't want to know anything about her current relationship because it would be really shitty if you were with somebody that were then told it wouldn't last. That would be depressing. She also mentioned dragonflies being a sign of hers, and maybe the sign of her friend who had told her some stories. The day comes, and my good friend Laura took me to see a spirit guide. Nobody paid for anything. This was just some kind of destiny. Her name was Julie. Never met her before, and she wouldn't know anything about me or my girlfriend, but she did. We were invited to her home, and it was cozy. I came in with an open mind, and I don't believe in anything, really. But there's no way all of this is a string of endless coincidences. She started reading me. She gazed into my soul and looked away while I was sat on the bar stool in her own kitchen. I felt that looking into her eyes for however long would be pretty awkward, especially for posture. She started talking so fast she wouldn't even pause for a moment, and I didn't say a single word for the entire duration. I just listened. You are followed and protected by 4 spirits, 2 of which you don't know are dead. And when I was 4 years old, my grandfather died. I also lost a friend who was the son of Laura, who took me to see the spirit guide. Aside from that, I haven't lost any other friends or family. But my lifestyle has been one where people come and go, and I meet many people and made lots of friends for life, but had to part ways. Made sense. Not to get over analytical, but 4 has always been my favorite number and my magic number. You're going to have a change of transportation. This one was random and confused me the most, but because of all my traveling in life, I've never had really one change of plans. Well, fuck me. Next day it happened. I was supposed to hire a car and drive to Montreal, but the car hire wasn't accepting her license because her country has a very specific restriction of driving in Canada. Never heard of such a thing. We had to abandon that and had to catch buses the next day instead. That's not all. We need about 5 or 6 buses and 25 hours to Montreal. First bus broke down on the highway within an hour, in the snow. 2 changes of transportation right after the day we were told. Syria. Something happened in Syria. Every time I thought about it since, it gets creepier and creepier. My girlfriend's brother was in Portuguese Air Force and went to Syria to fight ISIS. ISIS captured him and cut his head off, and there's a documentary about this. Never found it. My girlfriend didn't tell me this until we left, and Julie didn't know my girlfriend, and not even her name or anything about her in advance. Even so, this isn't something you could search for. You lost an important necklace. When Julie was reading my girlfriend, she said this, and no more than 7 days earlier she lost the necklace her aunt gave her. Her aunt died. She told me this 2 to 4 days before we met Julie. So we were both shocked to hear this because my girlfriend knew about it that week. There were also so many obscure things from my past that I hadn't even thought about for 10 or 15 years. You just couldn't make it up. I couldn't even tell you, but it was real. He wants to tell you, comrade. My friend that died in 2015 knew me for a few years, and we would address each other as comrade because we were game developers that ran a very famous military genre gaming community. I completely forgot about this one. It was a reminder. Don't worry about money, it'll come. I wasn't sure what she meant at the time because my finances were always the same and stable. But a few months later, things became complicated, but I handled it. Then I had a golden opportunity to earn 6 figures on a project for May 2020. The person offering this deal was very nice, but something inside me told me to wait. And 2 weeks later, borders, airports, and stores all over the world shut down because of the coronavirus. And right now, this is still happening, but if this is also true, then perhaps whatever mess this virus could put me in, I'll be okay in the end, even with 2 new more mouths to feed. You have a question about your relationship, she said to both of us. There was literally not a word more on the subject of relationships. And as Hannah said, that would sort of suck the future. I immediately knew what Julie meant, and she was my girlfriend, and I was her boyfriend. But we never defined it, and we met casually and just kept seeing each other. Never said I love you, and we just existed side by side, and we get along well, but we never actually talked about our relationship. A few months later, we broke up and haven't seen each other since. Didn't even have a relationship status on Facebook. Ever since that day, for many months I kept seeing dragonflies, all because Hannah told me that she or her friend kept seeing dragonflies as well. I saw a real, alive dragonfly for the first time in years shortly after this experience, and I saw decorations of it in stores and everywhere. So many more things I wish I could remember.